What happened? What happened? Obviously, a tree fell across the road. What happened? How did that tree get moved? Teamwork. What else? Somebody decided to do something about it. What else? He inspired everyone else. The youngster did. Okay. Teamwork between kids and adults. Kids and adults working together. Okay. What else? The community got involved. What else? The kid didn't know you couldn't move it. He was going to move it by himself. A common goal. A common goal. Let's get the tree moved. What else? What about the conditions? It was raining, people gave up. Nobody wanted to get dirty. It was wet. It was uncomfortable. They kept waiting for somebody else to come do it. Who? Where was the government? Asleep in the car. Now, I'm not talking about your State Department of Ed or your government, our government system. But in this one, yeah, they were kind of snoozing in the car, in a nice, warm, dry car. But the point here is, you guys have got a tree laying right across your path. And that tree represents the number of kids in your schools that are not where you want them to be. Can you move that tree? Not sure? Not by yourself? How many people are in this room? I think Terry told me this morning there's going to be about 300 of you or so, something like that. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of brain power. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of power. And that's what you guys represent. Think of all that you all know together. Think of all that you know collectively. This is one of the phenomena that we see happen in these high-performing, high-poverty schools, is that they marshal their collective power. You got an elementary school with 22 teachers. You got a middle school with 39 teachers. And we're not just talking about the teachers. You got a lot of other adults in these buildings. The bottom line here is, you can move the tree. This work can be done. But it will only be done in every circumstance that we visited and seen. It will only happen when all of you decide you want to make it happen. And that's kind of the gist of what this work's about. It's your collective will. So we're going to get better. Not a little bit, not a touch. We're going to get a lot better. We're going to do it pretty soon. So how do schools do this? How does this happen? Well, what we've tried to characterize and build in our work is a framework. If you open your handout to, I think it's page 2, you'll see something called Framework for Action. And we've tried to characterize what we saw happening in the way of action in all of these schools, in every one of these. I'm going to talk about this framework for a few minutes, and then we'll get close to 9:30, 9:15 or so, something like that. In that range, and we'll take a little break then. So let's talk about this framework, and you can probably see it better in your handout. There were 3 actions that happened in all of these schools. 3 primary actions. This is simple. This is simple language. Guess what? These actions are happening in every one of your schools. You're doing these to some degree. We know you are. You wouldn't be having the success you are if you weren't. Number 1, they foster healthy, safe, and supportive learning environments. Now, the word that's not there that that is the operative word here is for all kids, the words, all kids. So what we want you to do is, as we work our way through this framework, and you get kind of a big picture of what happens in these schools, in these districts that become high performing, is we often place question marks and ask what we call high leverage questions. So you can take this first phrase, creating healthy, safe, and supportive learning environments for all kids, and you could put a do we and a question mark at the end. Do we create a healthy, safe, and supportive learning environment for every kid? And we'll talk about the process of how, once you ask that question, how those tend to unfold in discussions among staff and adults and so on. But the first thing is to ask the question. The second area, focusing on learning. We all do that. You get tested on it. We know this is what school's about in many respects. We focus on learning. So we obviously saw that in these schools. They focus a lot on learning and student achievement. But they also focused on two other areas of learning that were critical. One is what you're doing right now, professional learning. So it's student learning, professional learning, meaning in every one of the schools we studied, they had significant, articulate plans of how we're going to learn to get better. It's not just about us deciding we're going to get better. It often involves some level of professional learning, professional development. What do we need to do? And you guys all engage in that. We know you do. The third area of learning is the system. The systems of these schools became more efficient. They became smarter, if you will. They became more nimble and adept to work with wide ranges of kids, some of which had different needs than other kids. So student, professional, and system learning, those things all happened in these schools. And finally, building leadership capacity. Through doing this work in learning and the environment, we saw the systems emerge and build capacity in these schools. And what does that mean? It means a whole lot of people started helping pick that tree up. It wasn't just the principal, or the principal and the counselors, or the principal and the counselors and the lead teachers, or the department chairs. It was all of the folks in the school began engaging in activity related to leading our effort. Obviously, there are different roles. Obviously, some people are going to be in a classroom all day, and others spend more time in an office or doing leadership kinds of things. But the bottom line is they worked together, they collaborated, and they all helped move that tree. So what happens when that occurs, these actions? Well, we find 5 areas of school culture, 5 areas that significantly changed and improved in these schools. And this is an area where, as I talk through these, I want you to think about these 5 areas in relation to your schools here in Ponca City. These 5 areas are also this is the essence, what I'm walking you through now is what our new book is about, where we've gone in deeply to work with teachers to find out how do you implement change in these areas. Let's start with the first one, high expectations and support. If I were to ask, how many of you have high expectations for your kids? Every hand in the room would go up. If I were to ask, are there some kids that you are concerned aren't able to get where they need to be and aren't going to be? Might get a few people respond, but that's the question to ask yourselves. Do we really have high expectations for every one of our kids? That's essential. If you have low expectations, the kids you have low expectations for are probably going to remain at that level, because low expectations translate directly to practice. So if you look out at your class and you think, I know that family and those kids, they aren't going to get this. The older brother didn't, the older sister didn't. I never can connect with the parents. I'll just keep them happy and we'll get by in school. But these kids, they're not going to college. They're not going. If those conditions exist, And what's even more important, if they are encouraged or allowed to be verbalized by staff, that is one of the greatest barriers that these schools told us they had to take on, is we had to get to a position where we believed every kid could do it. And if they weren't being successful, we had to think about what do we do differently. And Tammy's going to talk a little bit about kind of the opposite of that in just a minute. So high expectations and support, one of the key areas. Second key area, a commitment to equity. The teachers, the staffs, the folks that live and work in these schools clearly understood the difference between equal and equitable. What's the bottom line here? Equity means that if you're going to get all kids to the level you want them to be, some of your kids are going to need more. We can't give every kid the equal same amount of adult support, of instructional support, of whatever, and expect them to progress as well as a kid that has considerable advantages over some of our kids. Equity is a big part of this equation. And knowing the difference between equal and equitable is important, and acting on it is even more important. A commitment to equity, found it in all the schools we studied. A professional accountability for learning. Well, you've all got that. You're all certified, you're all employed by the district here, probably the vast majority of you are tenured. You've been here, you've been working hard. We know that. What does professional accountability for learning really mean? I want to give you an example. We were on a school in the northern part of Idaho on the Nez Perce Reservation. We know you guys have a number of kids here that are Native American. And when you disaggregate the performance of those kids, you'll see what that tells you in terms of how they do compared to your non-Native American kids. In the case of this little school, Lapway Elementary, they were one of the schools that had been recognized as a high-performing school. Somebody whistling? Sorry, I don't know how to turn my alarm off. I have to say, I thought I heard every ringtone that was out there. But I've never heard a whistle. I thought somebody just started whistling. Okay, back to Lapway. So in Lapway, we were interviewing a Title I teacher in a first grade classroom. And it was actually a mix of kids, some kindergarten and first grade kids were in the small group she was working with. And it was kind of a reading circle, about 8 or 9 kids. And watched her teach, watched her coach these kids, and they did their little lesson for about 40 minutes, and the kids left, and we sat down to interview her. And I asked the question, tell me about your kids. What's up? This was the late fall of the year. And she put her head up like that and went, oh. Now I've been out doing this long enough, and been in enough schools, and been a teacher, and been a principal, and all that stuff, that I was pretty sure what I was going to hear was something in the way of an excuse, or something in the way of something wrong with what was wrong with these kids. And the teacher went on to say, this is the most challenging group of kids I've ever had at the beginning of the year. I've been here 6 years. I've had 6 groups of kids, and I always work with the low-level reading needs. I've never had a group of kids this challenging. And I said, well, what do you mean? What's going on? And she said, well, we have a pretty significant methamphetamine problem in this district and in this area. And we know that of the little kids you just saw in this class, at least half of them are coming from homes where there is illicit drug use going on, probably meth. And we think what we're seeing, it's been going on a few years and growing. This was several years ago. And we're thinking we're starting to see some of it come to school now. Not that the kids were abusing, but certainly the environment they were growing up in. She said we've also got 3 or 4 of these kids are probably suffering or impacted by fetal alcohol syndrome. We know that's going on. So in other words, when these kids came this fall, they've got challenges, but most of them they didn't know their letters. They had no symbol recognition. A lot of these kids have probably never been read to in their lives. All that stuff. You got those kids here. We know you do. They're across the United States, particularly where poverty exists. And at that point, I said, well, what's going to happen to these kids? Now that's where I thought I would hear maybe an excuse or maybe it's beyond me. And when I asked that question, immediately that teacher said, well, they're going to learn to read this year, every one of them. That's what we do. That's what I do. And whatever it's going to take, these kids are going to be reading at the level of first grade so they're ready for the second grade, or kindergarten ready for the first grade after this year. Well, that's a little story, that little example is one that epitomizes this notion of professional accountability for learning. When teachers, when educators, when adults in schools take that perspective, that we're going to get them there this year, what follows that? Well, something to do with whatever it takes. I went back and checked on that teacher later in the year and those kids and asked, how'd those kids do? Did you catch them up? And she said, we did. We got every one, and a couple of them had summer interventions added on to that, but they got them all ready, those 7, 8, 9 kids, for starting their next year's school. Why? Because they focused on the needs of those individual kids, and they put the energy and resources and support necessary to get them there, in spite of the living conditions in the homes that they were coming from. The fourth area, courage and will to take action. Now, I would describe the actions of that Title I teacher as courageous. She stepped out, she worked hard, she marshaled resources, she demonstrated courage. There are all kinds of examples we saw in these schools of courage, of courageous action, the will to do things happening from teachers that were demonstrating a professional accountability for learning, but also just simply said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this work on. We're going to move this tree. I won't go into a lot of those stories, but you've got them right here as well. And we'll share a couple examples later. The last one, and it shouldn't be the last one, it maybe should be the first one, caring relationships and advocacy. Caring relationships and advocacy. You've all heard the expression, it all starts with relationships. We all know that. And I don't care whether we're talking about coaching your football team, to a music session or a choir session, or maybe learning algebra, or maybe getting your decimals right. Whatever it is, if an adult has a relationship with the kid, it can make a huge, huge difference. And this is not just something that we spout. This has been studied deeply. We'll share some of that in a few minutes. Some people believe if you have a relationship with the kid, that supersedes the technical teaching that you're actually doing. In other words, kids will do things, and kids they'll actually perform. They'll try harder. They'll work harder. I never forget the experience I had in a school in Portland, Oregon a few years back, where I was working with the school for several days, and on the second day or so, one of the department chairs, it was a high school, said, I'd like you to meet Shauna. And we're having a particular challenge with Shauna. And I said, well, what's going on? Tell me about Shauna. And they said, well, here, look at her transcript. And Shauna's transcript it was from the beginning of that year. She was a sophomore that year. And the transcript had her 6 classes, and her first quarter grades were like B, C, 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 B, C. And her second quarter grades, this was in the spring, were C, C, D, D, C, D, F. And her third quarter grades were D, F, 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 D, F, F, B. I looked down at that B and thought, one B and the rest are D's and F. Well, Shauna, they said, go to this room, Shauna will come see you after school. We want you to talk to her. And so Shauna, I was sitting and listening, and school's over, the kids were gone, and I heard this jingling sound, kind of bouncy jingling, like, little bells or something. The door pops Shauna. Just smile on her face. Half of Shauna's head was shaved bald. The other half was her hair was pink and was just exploded. It was about this long out the other side of her hair. She had enough metal in her ears and nose and tongue and face and chin to blow up a metal detector. And that's what was making all this noise as she came down the hall. And she was just cheerful and smiling, and she said, they sent me down here that you were going to talk to me. And I said, well, let's talk about it. We chatted for a minute, and I said, well, help me understand your transcript. You started the year, and you were doing okay, and it's been steady downhill, and now you're 3/4 of the way through, more than that, and you're failing almost every class except one. And that class is French. You're getting a B in French. You've done well all year. Why? How could you get a B in French and fail health, and fail phys ed, and fail whatever? And she smiled and looked at it and said, yeah, that's right. She said, it's Mrs. Jackson. I said, who's Mrs. Jackson? And she said, she's my French teacher. I said, well, what does she do? Does she just give you grades? What happened? Oh, no. At the first of the year, she got to know me. And she learned about me and my family. Every day she'd greet me when I'd come in. Every day at the end of class, she'd check in with me. She gave me hard assignments. If I didn't get it, she'd make herself available. Sometimes I'd see her over lunch, after school. Sometimes she'd call me at night and see if I was getting the homework assignment okay. She wouldn't leave me alone. And I said, well, is that a bad thing? And she said, no, I guess not. But she just was always present. And I said, so is that why you learned French? And she said, I said, do you like French? And she said, yeah, I didn't at first, but I kind of do now, and it's easy. It's easy. I can do French. I looked over at the other classes, D's and F's. It was all about a teacher, and a teacher that connected with this kid. And this kid would do things, and she said at the end of my little session with her, in thinking about it, when I asked her, what really caused you to do this? And she said, I didn't want to let her down. I didn't want to let her down. And it wasn't that hard. So she bounced out and went on her way. I don't know what happened. I know she finished French with an A or a B that year. Hopefully the school got some other things going to help her in her other areas. But that's a relationship. You guys have all got them. And I'll bet you've got stories just like this one, where you've worked with and helped kids. And that has literally turned their life around. I bet you've all had some yourselves where a teacher's helped you. This new book we're working on, we interviewed 40-some teachers, and to a teacher, every one of those teachers could talk about one of their teachers that had made a huge difference for them. Caring relationships and advocacy. The last areas of this framework are the 5 areas of impact that schools can access and partner with and connect with to make a difference for kids and their achievement and their growth. And that's obviously the sphere of influence of the district and how the district can help schools, as well as the schools working with the district supports that come to you, district encouragement. Districts make a huge difference in terms of a school's improvement. The school itself, the classroom, the community, and the family. Well, how does all this work? It works differently in every setting we've studied. There are no 2 settings, there's no one single roadmap It says do this, do this, do this, do this. All we know is all of these features of this framework are present in every high-performing, high-poverty school that we've ever studied. We urge you in your own time, and we're going to give you a moment or two right now to think about it, is think about this framework, turn to one of your colleagues or two of your colleagues, and ask yourselves, put those question marks on, how much of this is going on in our school, in our setting? How well? Does any of this make sense? Does it connect with what we're doing? Let's take about 3 minutes, turn and talk, and share your thoughts in terms of how this framework fits your setting in your school. Okay, great. So as we think about all we've kind of reviewed this morning, usually at this time, someone in the room, I'll hear a murmur or I'll hear a question. What did these schools do? Yeah, this is the big picture, but what did they do? I'm going to answer that for you right now. And here's your answer. 5 words. If you ask these schools what they did, this is folks in the schools would tell you. We got to know our kids. Now, if I ask you all, you know your kids, your answers would be yeah. The difference in how the kids become known in these high-performing, high-poverty schools is pretty remarkable in terms of how deeply each adult gets to know their range of kids. Do they all get to know all of them? No, of course not. But in terms of your class, the kids you interact with, if you're a coach, if you're a leader of an extracurricular activity, whatever it is, you get to know the kids deeply. That's what happened in these schools. So we're gonna show Jennifer, if she's back at her station, we're gonna show, just to elucidate this, we're gonna show you a little video that's kind of a humorous take on knowing your kids.
1 minute please. Time, thank you. Would you all please put down your pens and bring your papers to the front of the room. Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. Gave you plenty of warnings about time. You failed. Sorry.
Excuse me, do you know who I am?
I have absolutely no idea.
Good.
I always have to ask, are there any kids here in the Ponca City schools that would do something like that? Oh yeah. The better question is, are there any adults in this room and you could point and nominate that would do something like this? Any here in this room? Yeah, there's some even raising their hands, self-nominated. How well do we know our kids? How well do we know our kids? What we found happening in these schools were 3 overarching practices that happened. And these were practices that probably occur in all your schools, but these practices were intentionally driven by actions in these schools, by the adults in the schools. So again, it's almost common sense language. And let me say a few words about these. They ask questions. It has to be okay to ask questions. It has to be okay to sit in the faculty meeting and say, no, wait a minute. We got 7 kids at whatever level, at whatever need that we ought to be talking about. Can we talk about these kids? Can we spare some time during our meeting to focus on the needs of these kids? It's that kind of stuff. It's got to be okay to ask questions as adults, as kids, Questions are hugely important as drivers of both curiosity but also knowledge and information. So if you've got questions, it's got to be okay to ask them. That goes for the paraprofessional staff, the classified staff, your bus drivers, your lunchroom people. How often do you engage with them, engage together with them in conversations about kids? That's something we see happening in these schools is they don't count how many teachers we have or how many paras we have. They use the term adults. How many adults do we have in this building? And we'll give you some examples of that in a moment or two. Asking questions. The second area, using data. How well we got mountains of the stuff. How well do we use the data that we have? How well do we actually make sure it's usable? And that probably, if you're like most districts and most schools, it probably varies by the level of importance the leadership places on. We're going to know our data. We're going to know it and we're going to use it and we're going to act on it. And we're going to make sure it's accurate. And we're going to make sure that it's helpful and usable and accessible. Those kinds of things. We'll say more about it. And then building relationships. We've already talked a little bit about that. So these practices of asking questions, using and keeping data, and putting a premium on building relationships with every kid, making sure every kid has a relationship, are practical strategies that we see happening intentionally, meaning at faculty meetings or staff meetings. Folks will ask about these. They'll take time to talk about these various areas. And we'll talk more about this afternoon when we're in smaller groups. So let me give you an example of questions. Last year, Edutopia, I know some of you probably are regular visitors to the Edutopia website. It's a great site for teachers, probably the best in this country, or one of the best, edutopia.org. Millions of visits daily, I think, across the country. Go to that site if you haven't, just to add to your own knowledge base. But that group asked us to take they actually asked to use our last book and break it down into a 7-part series that they aired on Edutopia's website. It's an all-online website over the course of last year. And they took each one of these 7 topics. They wanted to kind of get the gist of this 200-page book into 7 2 to 3-page, almost like blogs of information about certain aspects related to kids living in poverty. So here's one of this was the March, there's 2 of them actually, but they both speak to questions. Is your school asking the right questions about poverty? You can go to the website, you can pull up that little blurb. This is a great start. We've seen it happen and being used in a lot of schools where the staff will read this 2-page blog about, are we asking the right questions about our kids that live in poverty? Meaning, are we trying to actively learn and improve our knowledge base? It's a tool, it's a little practical thing you can do. But it speaks to this one speaks to the power of questions, and again, this one, 5 questions that promote student success. So that's that little blurb, and that was when, in June of 15, I guess it's 2 years ago now, that spoke to 5 specific areas or questions that educators discussed and talked about related to their kids that live in poverty and success. So it's kind of just, these are little mini professional development things, but this is a way when you ask, well, how do we approach this notion of questions? We always say, what we saw in the schools was, number one, it has to be safe. You have to have open conversations with faculty and leaders and other adults that involve questions, and everybody's got to feel like it's okay. It's okay to ask. It's okay to raise questions. And then second, how do we get better at it? How do we use this to promote our own thinking? Often questions will drive the need for data. So a question comes up, and it might have to do with Shane's attendance, and say, yeah, his achievement is not very good, but He's often late for class, or he's missing my study sessions, or whatever. And that will drive, often in these conversations we saw in these schools, somebody would say, well, how many? How often? How much late is he? They actually track these kinds of things in these high-performing, high-poverty schools where they'll get data. They've got a question about something, they'll seek to get their data, whatever's available. It's attendance, behavior, achievement, whatever. And then they'll develop a little snapshot of the circumstance. So often, these kinds of questions and looking at data will lead to something we saw happen in all these schools, and that was confronting brutal facts. So what do we mean by brutal facts? Some of you, I know, probably not, what's the student teacher's name? What's your first name? Colleen. Colleen's probably never heard of this book. There was a book called Good to Great that was written probably, Colleen was about 4 when it was written, or 5. So she probably doesn't have it in the library, but I bet a lot of you do. It's a red book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. Jim Collins and his Stanford colleagues studied corporations and businesses and organizations like schools that had moved from being okay and good to great, and tried to figure out what's the difference, what do they do? And it's very much aligned with the work we do in looking at schools to see how do you get from okay to becoming great or becoming high performing. And one of the features that happens in this work that Collins identified is doing something that they titled Confronting Brutal Facts. And here are his words. Swift dramatic improvement requires an encounter with the brutal facts, those awkward, unpleasant truths that organizations prefer not to address or even talk about. So if we were doing a couple days of this work with you, we were in your schools, we'd probably have you turn in small groups in school-based teams and ask, what are your brutal facts? Do you have any? What are your brutal facts? Let me give you an example. If you have, in terms of your reading data, you have 35% of your kids or 30% of your kids not reading at proficient levels, is that a brutal fact? It is for those kids. Because we know without intervention and additional work, the chance of catching those kids up is sometimes left to luck, or maybe a teacher that takes a different approach. But catching them all up, probably not going to happen. That's a brutal fact. What about attendance? You have kids that have chronic attendance issues. Is that a brutal fact? These are not easy conversations. These are not easy topics to deal with, but they're topics that regularly come up in collaborative meetings of faculty and staff in these schools, where it won't be a brutal facts meeting, but they'll recognize if there are issues that would constitute something pretty serious we need to take a look at, they will do that. Tammy, you want to say a word or two about this one? I'll let you just take this mic.
In June, Bill and I were doing some work in Mobile, Alabama, and almost at the end of the session, one of the superintendents came up, or a person in the superintendent's office, and said, you just need to see this. You need to show this, you need to show this, you need to show this. And a part of why this comes after this is just 1 minute, I'd like for you to think about one student in your classroom. And while you're thinking about that student, what happens to them after the bell rings? What happens when they go home? Some of my teachers didn't know that after the bell rang, I went home to an empty house every single day. But my job at the empty house was to make sure that my younger brother and sister had something to eat, that their dinner was cooked, that the house was clean. My mother has a vacuum fetish, and you had better vacuum the house. If you don't, she's going to wake you up when she comes home at midnight to make sure that it's done. And so being the oldest daughter in a single-parent home, there were some things that happened after the bell that the teacher didn't know about. And so this particular clip they gave us in Mobile because one of their students at Baker High School had a project, and her story and the story of some of the kids in her class, her classmates, are told what happens after the bell.
My name is Amanda Watson. Today, I'm here to speak on behalf of those who are hurt, those who are questioned, and those who are dealing with more than they can handle. All of the situations that you will see in this video are currently being dealt with by some of the students of Baker High School. For privacy, the students will remain anonymous. This is my school. These are my peers, and here is my documentary. Introducing After the Bell Rings.
A Baker student's day begins at 7:15. First block, second block, Hornet, lunch, third block, fourth block, 2:40. Over 7 hours of school during the day. It's a daily cycle that all 2,789 students go through. You see them walking through the hallway every day. But do you know what actually happens to them when they leave school? No, you don't. Here is a reality check.
I have my own problems. And believe it or not, but this isn't the worst problem at all. A majority of people that have problems going on at home don't really tell people, but they act like they do. They're either rude to you or very quiet. The next time that someone is randomly rude to you, think about it. They may have something going on bad at home, and that may be their only way to express their feelings. Or if someone's sitting by themselves, do them a favor. Go sit next to them. Talk to them. And for people who are watching this that have their own problems at home, you aren't alone. Life will go on and everything is going to be okay. If you come across someone with a really serious problem, go talk to your counselor. Because you don't want to be called a snitch, but sometimes you really need help from an adult. Because honestly, you never know what's going to happen after the bell rings.